He has this notion of the afterlife in many of his novels. You could say that the afterlife was a kind of a deep freeze, as if you'd been refrigerated and essentially had been stuck in a shelf in a mortuary, couldn't move, and yet you still had some slow-moving thoughts, and communicating with the rest of the world basically by telephone.
In the consultation lounge at the beloved Brethren Moratorium, several customers were communing with their half-lifer relations. Damn this earphone arrangement, Glenn Runciter grumbled as he fitted the plastic disc against the side of his head. In the earphone, words, slow and uncertain, formed. Fragments of the mysterious dream his wife now dwelt in. This is an unnatural place, he thought, halfway between the world and death.
Phil's favorite thing was that things are seldom what they seem. I think that the line, just like a Phil Dick novel, refers to a kind of feeling about the untrustworthiness of contemporary reality, that you could poke your finger through it in some way, and then you'd find out what was really going on behind it, except it would turn out to be another fake behind it, and you have to poke your way through that, and so forth. I remember Phil saying, I want to break through what is only apparently real and get at what is really real. And that was his heroic idea of himself.
What do you want?
Well, this is going to be very difficult for you to accept, Mr. Quaid.
I'm listening.
I'm afraid you're not really standing here right now.
You know, Doug, you could have fooled me.
I'm quite serious. You're not here, and neither am I.
That's amazing. Where are we?
At Recall. You're strapped into an implant chair, and I'm monitoring you from the psychoprobe console.
Ah, I get it. I'm dreaming. And all this is part of the delightful vacation your company has sold me.
Not
right?
exactly. What you're experiencing is a free-form delusion based on our memory tapes. But you're inventing it yourself as you go along.
What if it is my delusion? Who the hell invited you?
I've been artificially implanted as an emergency measure. I'm sorry to tell you this, Mr. Quaid, but you've suffered a schizoid embolism. We can't snap you out of your fantasy. And I've been sent in to try to talk you down.
I consider the universe to be a clever fake, with streets and houses and shops and cars and people standing in the center of a stage, surrounded by props, by furniture to sit on, kitchens to cook in, cars to drive, food to fix. And then behind the props, the flat painted scenery, painted houses set farther back, painted people, painted streets, everything not real, only a series of tapes being played for us. Once you've opened your mind to the notion of fake, you're ready to think yourself into another universe entirely.
Technically, I was the third, but I think he married the first lady that he ever slept with, so I like to think of myself as the second. But I also think I was the most important one. He and Cleo lived in a little sort of a hovel in Berkeley, and they were very poor, and they believed in being very poor. They were sort of socialistically inclined. And but then when he met me, he told me I and my house were everything he always dreamed of. I'm very family-oriented and very middle-class bourgeois person, I guess. And so I wanted him to write from 9 to 5. So he switched over and he wrote from 9 to 5 and came home for lunch.
Mars is a science fiction landscape of tremendous importance, and for Dick it was the perfect kind of blank slate. For him, Mars was a perfect vision of American suburbia, an X-ray vision of Californian culture in all of its mindlessness and triviality. Everything had been stripped away, and the emptiness at the heart of things was revealed more than ever.
Norm Shine walked down the length of garden between the rows of jagged leaves. Insecticides from Earth simply had not done the job here at Chicken Pox Prospects. The native pests had been waiting 10,000 years, biding their time, for someone to appear and make an attempt to raise crops. He was exhausted. Maybe each new colonist had started out this way, he thought, in an agony of effort. And then the torpor, the hopelessness, claimed them.
Later on, he rented a little place that you could see dirt between the cracks of the floor to write in. And he really liked that much better than staying around his house.
He lived alone in this deteriorating apartment. Eventually, everything within the building would merge, would be faceless and identical, mere pudding-like kipple piled to the ceiling. When nobody's around, kipple reproduces itself. The entire universe is moving towards a final state of total, absolute kippleization.
You could recognize this strange world with rubbish in the streets and, well, rubbish filling up the houses, rubbish filling up your head. It all seemed to make a great deal of sense, as I think at first it didn't to the Americans. Why was all this? Well, Dick was very much against the consumer society. Goods meant nothing to him. This, I think, was a very admirable and non-conformist trait in his character. Of course, if he had any money, he'd spend it on drugs.
Well, the 60s, the drug culture began, and Phil joined in enthusiastically. Partly he used it just as amphetamines he was producing a whole lot of work. He was under constraints to produce 2 or 3 novels a year. So there would be nights when he would be writing all night long, and he fueled it with drugs. His first big success was as the sort of poet laureate of the drug culture. Realistic novels about junkies are always, you know, depressing, morbid stories of lower-class, scuzzy people. Phil wrote stories that a junkie could read and say, hey, what's happening to my mind? I mean, it was the prose equivalent of a drug trip.
In Scanner Darkly, they're all taking this drug called death that is burning out their brains, but since it's burning out your brain, you can't think straight about what's happening to you. It truly captures a poignance of people in our moment in history systematically, slowly destroying themselves in the name of having fun and not being able to figure out what's happening to them and why everything's falling apart the way it is.
They sleep like Count Dracula, he thought. Junkies do. Staring straight up until all of a sudden they sit up, like a machine, cranked from position A to position B. It must be day, the junkie says. Or anyhow, the tape in his head says. Every junkie is a recording. It must be day. It must be.
There's a character in there that starts coming apart. And this is a character who is an undercover narcotics officer who ends up investigating himself. And he finds himself looking at tapes of himself and discovering the man is guilty of crimes that he didn't even know he had committed. He's dealing with his own sense of guilt and his own inability to recognize himself. And it's schizophrenia at its best. And it's funny.